Hi, this is Pat McDonald, your host for Vote for Vermont, where our tagline is listening beyond the soundbites. Ben Kinsley is here. He's co-host and co-producer and sponsor.
Yes.
Could you
Pat.
talk a little bit about your enterprise?
Yeah, I run a consulting firm called Imperium Advisors. We do a whole bunch of different things, mostly working with nonprofits. We do things like lobbying, public policy development, media strategy, technology consulting. There's a whole bunch of different things that we do, and if you have a nonprofit, give us a call. We'll help you out, figure out how to reach your audience.
I have a nonprofit. We should chat. and I guess this is for me anyway, a very unusual show. We have gone outside the normal bounds, haven't we not? This is our guest is Bruce Shields. He's a PhD and former president of the Ethan Allen Institute. And we are talking about, Bruce, welcome. I forgot to say hello officially.
Hello.
Anyway, we are talking about Brexit. And we've been hearing about it on the radio and on TV. And I thought to myself, Brexit's got to have some implications on our economy in the United States. And I thought, I'd like to understand it more. And I spent all day yesterday researching this. It's very complicated, may I say. And I finally sent Bruce some questions, and I hope to goodness I got them right. But good luck explaining this, Bruce.
Well, the questions are wonderful.
Oh, thank you. That's because I found an article that said, questions to ask about Brexit.
You found the right article.
I just copied them.
Yeah.
No, not really. But anyway, first, could you talk a little bit about yourself and about your background?
Well, I am originally born in Maryland. My grandfather was part of the great diaspora of Vermonters going west.
Oh.
So my father was born in Pueblo, Colorado. My mother was born in Boulder, Colorado. Her father was a silver miner.
Nice.
And my father grew up absolutely dirt poor on a dry, not an irrigated, but a dry farm in eastern Colorado. And it was pretty clear by the time he was 15 that there was not going to be a life on that farm.
Right.
And so he worked for 4 or 5 years at one of the big inns up in the Rockies.
Oh, nice.
And worked guiding people to the top of Long's Peak, which is a 14,000-foot peak.
Yep.
And so eventually he put together enough funds to go to the University of Colorado in engineering, graduated in 1928.
That's a while ago.
And, well, it is, yeah. Our family's kind of stretched out, but the the job that he got was with the U.S. Patent Office.
Oh.
And he'd had a number of offers with private outfits, General Electric Research Facility over in Schenectady, Bell Labs, and I don't really know what prompted him to take the job with the government. But a year and a half later, he felt that had really been the right choice.
Oh, good. So what was he doing for the government?
And he was an electrical engineer. He was working as a patent examiner in the U.S. Patent Office. And he, like a number of engineers that I've known in my life, he had a tremendous curiosity for how things worked.
Right.
And he imparted that to me. I never had his mathematical skills, so I didn't go into engineering. But
And so what brought you all to Vermont? Did he come here too, or as a family?
I was visiting cousins up in the West Glover, Greensboro area. And that was in 1963, and we had so much fun visiting. I bought a small place to,
There you go.
and one thing led to another. When my own academic. I went into the academic world, had a PhD in medieval literature, spent a year at the University of Edinburgh, which
is why we know Brexit.
Which is relevant
right.
to discussion of Brexit. Have kept in touch with a number of people in Scotland since then. And so that was my first career, and then I had a sawmill, and then I operated an agway store.
Oh, cool.
And after I was done with that, I began volunteering to sit on the boards of a number of statewide organizations like Farm Bureau and
Nice.
the Vermont Forest Products Association.
Oh, we know Bill
yes, we
Sayer.
know those folks. Yes, we do.
Oh, we know Bill. Yeah.
And so that you might say that volunteering was my third career, and it's been enjoyable.
That's great. Good for you. And we know about volunteering, right?
Oh,
Here
yes,
we are.
yes, exactly.
Here
Indeed.
we are.
So today we're talking about Brexit, which is something I'm sure pretty much all of our viewers have heard something about. But can you kind of give us a little bit of background on what the United Kingdom is, their form of government? Because that kind of tells us a little bit, informs the conversation a little bit as we're talking about why the UK is trying to separate itself from Europe.
And the short answer is that UK was never comfortable joining Europe. As you may know, during the Napoleonic Wars, the Emperor Napoleon attempted to gain power over England, but he didn't have a fleet. And if a continental power doesn't have a fleet, it can't really do much to England.
Right.
And so he created the continental system, where he was going to lay an embargo on the United Kingdom and starve them out. But they had, the United Kingdom already by 1805 had Canada, where they had friendly relations with the U.S.
Right.
They were developing Australia. They had India. They had South Africa. They didn't need France.
Right.
There you go.
Yeah.
And so they were not starved out. And in fact, a few years later, defeated Napoleon in the first Battle of Waterloo and
Right.
attempted to exile Napoleon to a tiny little island off South Africa.
Really?
Yeah, but that's another story altogether.
Another show for another day.
Yeah, exactly. Another
Right.
show for another day.
Yeah.
And so and the British attitude toward government has always differed from that on the continent. I do try to maintain some currency in medieval stuff.
Right.
And so recently I've been reading a history of the guild system. And during the Middle Ages, everybody who had a job was involved in a guild, and they voted on who could work and what kind of things they could make and so on. England had guilds, but they didn't tell people what to do. And in fact, there's a famous court case in the time of Henry VIII where a guild attempted to enforce its regulations against some fellow who had set up, I think, to make shoes. And he was making shoes and selling them, and the guild said, "You can't do that."
Right.
And so it went to court, and the British court, and it may have been Queen Elizabeth or her father, I'm not sure which reign that was in at the moment, the court ruled that a monopoly was contrary to common law.
Right.
And that's what's really different between the United Kingdom system and the continental system. And that's the notion of common law, that there is a law which the people own, and so there's a control on Parliament writing laws because the people have the common law that they can use in defense against what Parliament tries to do against them.
And they call that constitutional monarchy. So they are reliant on their constitution to set the pace, to set the framework, correct?
And the British Constitution is unwritten.
Right. That's what's so unique about it, is that the common law serves as the Constitution, right? In essence.
In large part. And customs, the way things are done. And to be honest, my biggest education in the British common law comes from a novelist, Anthony Trollope. And public television picked up Anthony Trollope from the British BBC.
Yeah.
But they maybe 20 years ago, had a whole series of Anthony Trollope novels.
Wow.
And Trollope's novels are all set in or around Parliament.
Really?
So the chief character of one of Trollope's novels is the former Prime Minister of the UK, Benjamin Disraeli.
Oh, yes.
Who
that name.
Who was a flamboyant character. He makes Mr. Trump look like a very quiet person.
Whoa, that's saying something.
That's definitely saying
So
something.
now I read that there's, and I really didn't know much about the UK, except I told you before the show, I went up to Canada and they follow the same procedure, and I was visiting my counterpart up there, and she's part of the Parliament. And they were yelling at each other and throwing paper clips and screaming and getting up off their seats and walking around. And I'm like a deer in headlight going, what is this? And she looked up at me and just winked. And she's just sort of, said, don't worry about it. This is what we do. But because we are so formal talking to the speaker.
Right.
And you can't talk to if you ask a question of another legislature, you still have to direct it through the speaker, which sometimes they don't follow.
Yes.
But certainly nowhere near the behavior of the Canadian Parliament.
No, that's
and
right.
That's what they do here.
And the parliamentary procedures they're well codified. They have a rule book, a little bit like the Vermont Baker's Rules.
So if there's a challenge to the Constitution, and it's not written down, how do you
It is political.
Oh, it's
And
whatever you say politically, or is it a tradition?
You have to get a majority to support you in order
Oh.
to, and here's probably the most important difference for people to understand. We have a minor election every 2 years,
Right.
and a major election every 4 years. And during the 4-year term of the president, he's president.
Right.
That's it. Under the parliamentary system, let me back up again. When the U.S. Constitution was written down, they simply replaced the function of the king with the president.
Oh.
And so the president's powers are approximately similar to what King George III was able to exercise in the United Kingdom when he was a young man. Because of some of his excesses, he kept getting his powers trimmed as he aged. But the U.S. president has approximately the powers and some of the prerogatives of the king. The UK has migrated in a fairly similar direction, trimming the power of the
Right.
king.
Yeah.
But because it's an unwritten constitution, they never eliminated the king. They just eliminated the king's powers.
Right. Yeah. So today, the monarchy is more or less symbolic.
Right,
Yeah.
figurehead.
So the U.S. president, every opening of Congress, delivers a State of the Union message.
Right.
The equivalent in the UK is called the Speech from the Throne.
Ooh,
And the Queen goes to Parliament, and all of the pageantry, the mace bearer
right.
carries this immense gold mace, which represents the power of the monarchy, and lays it on a table in front of a throne, and the Queen briefly sits down in the throne, then stands up and reads the speech written by the Prime Minister. It's
Oh.
not her speech.
Really?
And-
Did you know that? I didn't know, did you?
And there's big
didn't.
question, what would happen if she said something on her own?
Yeah.
But for 180 years, no monarch has ever attempted
As I say, I don't
that.
think this queen would go outside the outside tradition.
If you saw that series on public television of Queen Victoria, they show her getting very angry that she's not allowed to say anything on her own. But,
So
but
tell
she
me,
followed it.
how do they change prime ministers? Because sometimes the other party has more votes, I guess, and they pretty much call for an election,
Right.
and then
Well,
boot
they
them
can-
out.
Well, it's go ahead.
Sorry, so just kind of put it in context of what the prime minister is. In that vacuum where, the monarch has gotten fewer and fewer powers to the point where they're basically just
Right,
a figurehead.
right.
The replacement for that leadership position has been the prime minister, which, our equivalent of would be something approximating the Speaker of the House, right?
Right.
Exactly. And so the Prime Minister is the leader of the majority party.
Right.
And so after an election, the two, and I think there's been one occasion where three candidates for the post of Prime Minister
Right.
appeared before the Queen, and that Victoria series portrayed that very effectively, where
Because I know they're always talking about, will they call an election and
Yeah, well, we've
Um,
heard a lot
boot out-
about that with
yes,
Boris Johnson.
yes,
and-
he hasn't.
yeah.
appeared before Queen Victoria, and then, as it so happened, she genuinely liked the people who were majority leaders, but doesn't matter. She would have to appoint the majority leader whether she liked it or not.
Very confusing.
And so the leader of the majority party is the one who becomes the prime minister. Now, he then has to organize a
Right.
government.
Right.
And normally, all of the cabinet offices are filled by people who were supporters of his. But there's no rule that it has to be those people. Politically, it generally is, but
And do some of them come from Parliament? Where
they're all
They're all-
people who were elected to Parliament in his party. And so if somebody doesn't like, and the UK has not had quite so much targeting of districts as the US has seen in recent years. But if somebody really hated the person who was likely to be Secretary of the Treasury, it would be possible to organize that constituency to vote for somebody
Oh, I
else.
see.
Then he'd be out.
Right.
No way he could be a member of the
Yeah.
government.
Huh.
Yeah, so you
that-
have to be a member of Parliament in order to be a member of the
right.
government.
So then
Yeah.
the Parliament moves to government, and then they have to backfill.
Yeah.
with an
Well,
election, the
and
guy from the parliament.
When we're talking about government, really, it's kind of an important distinction. We're talking about cabinet level positions. It's
That's
like,
right.
Right, like the exempt positions here.
like we would have exempt positions
Right.
in the U.S. government or even in state government, where you have people that are appointed by the executive. So.
We've got
And the UK doesn't have the precise equivalence of our executive. We have the executive agencies,
right,
where the president appoints the secretary of the
Right,
treasury, for
right.
instance. But there's a whole vast bureaucracy which is not elected. And-
so we really must talk about Brexit, because
Well,
I'm looking at.
we're
and so-
almost there.
Yeah,
Because the last piece of this puzzle, when the prime minister calls a vote on something, if that vote does not pass, the next motion from the floor can be to have a vote of no confidence.
oh, right.
This is what happened to
Yeah,
Theresa
right,
May.
it's-
If the
Theresa
vote
May,
of no
ouch.
confidence
Yeah.
gets a majority of parliament,
Yeah,
there must be an election.
huh.
That's not even an option. It must be an election. Well, there've
Because they
been,
voted, they have no confidence in the current prime minister.
now, with the complexity of the Brexit situation, I think there have now been 2 cases
Right,
where a prime minister's motion has failed, and then Parliament said, well, we didn't like the motion, but we still like the prime minister.
was that
Yes.
Theresa May?
The first
Yeah.
time. with
The first
Theresa
time,
May,
right.
Yeah.
Because I went back in my research, and David Cameron kind of started this all in 2016, where he asked for a vote or a referendum on whether to remain or leave the EU. And there are 28 countries in the EU, the European Union. And apparently the voters wanted out.
52%.
Yes, and so Cameron really figured they better do what the voters want. And then we find ourselves here because they've not been able to be successful.
And Cameron called for a referendum because the elections left a very divided result,
Right,
and government were not clear what the voice of the people had been.
right,
And Cameron personally was stunned.
right. He thought they were going to say
Yes.
because they said he wasn't specific enough, because he said remain or leave, and he didn't say remain leave with an agreement or leave without an agreement. He didn't add any clarifying words to that, so people just said, well, we're going to leave without thinking about it too much.
Well, Cameron is a Scot.
There you go.
And in my mind, that may have affected his thinking, because Scotland, in all of this polling, has run as high as 80% to remain.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they want to be separate from England, but they don't want to be that separate.
Right. Well, it's tiny. I'm sure it must benefit from the whole.
Yeah, well,
with
it's
all the other nations
the
sort
open
of.
trade and
yeah.
all that stuff.
But that has created a dilemma within the push and shove of the British political parties, because even though Scotland is relative to the rest of the UK pretty small, it's 7 or 8% of the population, for various reasons, the bulk of the leadership of the Labour Party came from Scotland.
Huh.
And so as the push within Scotland for devolution, for becoming separate from Scotland, from England, as that progressed, the Scottish Nationalist Party, SNP, candidates kept bumping off Labour
Oh.
Labor Party people, because SNP is really very strong socialist, and that they are a socialist party, and Labor, ever since Tony Blair, has been half socialist.
Interesting.
So the Scottish nationalists, they're full bore socialist, and so they kept bumping off the Labor.
Well, I found it interesting that
And,
they said.
and that deprived
sorry,
the
please.
Labour Party of their leadership, because like Cameron from Scotland, I don't know whether he lost his regional election. I think he did.
Oh, well, because he wants out of Brexit. He ran on that. That's how he won. But the reason that they wanted out was very interesting. It was immigration, because under the EU you can go back and forth and work wherever you want and trade, and so people were coming into the UK and taking jobs that might ordinarily. Where have we heard this before?
Well, it's a little more complicated
Yeah.
than that, but that was definitely part of it. You had these immigrants coming from, the Middle East and Eastern Europe that are then traveling through to the UK.
I used to travel to Switzerland on business. My company was a Swiss company, and everybody had work permits to work in Switzerland. And if the unemployment got too high, the first permits that they would pull would be from Italy. They'd be the first ones to go home, and the second was French. And the French, and they had this pecking order of and I thought, my God, that wouldn't fly here in the United States. That would be just a little un-PC.
Well, Switzerland is a unique entity,
Yes, it is.
and very interesting. On the issue of gun control, until very recently, every able-bodied male was required to be in the military.
Service, yes, right, right.
And as part of the military service, was required to have a fully operating weapon
Right.
at home, ready at all times.
The grassroots militia.
Yeah,
Part
exactly.
of
Yeah.
the reason that Germany never attacked them.
Yeah,
Smart
because
move.
literally every household
exactly.
was armed.
Exactly.
So, so we talked about immigration being one of them. There's also trade issues as
But
well.
immigration has a special situation in the UK. As the Commonwealth, the old English Empire, was modernized, the Commonwealth countries were given preference on emigrating to the UK. And so already before the immigration began coming from the EU, there were very large districts in many of the working cities like Manchester. There were something like 70,000 Pakistanis living in Manchester. And so it was not exactly xenophobia that was motivating people to oppose immigration. There was a feeling that they were full. And you get a sense of this. Again, public television, around New Year's, they produce or play, I should say, it's a BBC production, of the New Year's revels in Edinburgh. And part of that revel is a chorus made up of all of the high school kids who want to do that from all of the high schools in Edinburgh. So it's a chorus of about 1,300 or 1,400 high school kids. And if you see that in recent years, 3/4 of the faces are brown.
Interesting.
But
they weren't part of the EU, Pakistan.
No, but they
Yes,
were
so-
part of the empire.
They were part of the empire.
Oh.
Because Pakistan was part of India.
Right. Oh, wow. Sneaking right in.
And so hundreds of thousands of Pakistanis had English passports.
Interesting.
Same in India, same
Right.
in South Africa, Tanzania,
Yeah.
Jamaica. When I lived in Edinburgh, one of my neighbors was a Jamaican couple.
Oh, interesting. That's cool.
And so and that is not the image that most Americans have of life in Britain.
Right.
So the anti-immigrant was more a question of saturation than it was of
Right.
xenophobia.
Oh, I see. So it wasn't really the Pakistanians. It was just there were no jobs for
Or
the
housing.
Or housing, right?
Well, the culture felt overwhelmed.
Yeah, right.
And Scotland that's part of the Scottish nationalist movement.
Yeah.
Hundreds of thousands of English people have said, "Oh, Scotland would be a wonderful place to live,"
Maybe.
and they moved up and
Yeah.
bought houses, and Scotland for 200 years has exported people. At one time in the 1890s, 75% of all of the people who had ever been born in Scotland since 1800 were living elsewhere.
Whoa.
And
Yeah.
and my own family are part of that. So
My husband too.
Yeah,
He's Scottish.
there you
They all
go.
moved here to
So-
work in the Barry.
So there were some trade issues as well around, what goods were taxable or not taxable, and import, export, and that kind of thing.
and the EU is an incredible bureaucracy. It is the nanny state gone wild.
Oh, really?
Oh, yes. And everything is governed by pages and pages of regulation. So if you wanted to have a little business making spatulas, something that most anybody could make in their
Right.
garage and put together, under the English system, you'd make them and try to sell them. If they sold, you were in business.
Right.
If they didn't sell, you'd try something else. Under the EU, you would have to make an application for a license to manufacture spatulas. You would get a book which would have all of the specifications
Oh,
for
wow.
spatulas.
So much for entrepreneurship. Huh?
Oh, well, and that's been one of the issues with the EU. And another part of all of this was reaction to the failure of Greece.
Oh, which clearly fell.
And the failure of Greece exposes some of the weaknesses of the common market
Right.
EU system.
Right.
And
However, I read that in
and that weighed very heavily on many people who were
bet.
deciding whether to.
because I read in this article that on March 2017, they actually withdrew from the EU, but they had 2 years in which to make it final. And when they made that announcement, the pound crashed, the stock markets, I mean, the reaction to leaving was very, very bad financially for the UK.
And that's been partially true, but I happen to follow the exchange rate for
Right.
the pound. It's down a little, but
So it sort of bounced back up when the world didn't fall apart.
yeah, those runs on money are often quite short-lived.
Well,
George Soros was able to make huge sums by facilitating the crash, and he actually bet against the pound at one time.
oh, no kidding.
And as a result of his short selling, he brought the pound down by about 15 points.
Wow. So much for the little guy.
Yeah.
So when the vote took place, originally the UK was supposed to have a final withdrawal date of March 29th, 2019. That date has come and gone.
Yeah.
And the UK has not left the European Union today. So what happened from the point of the vote in 2016 to, where we are today in terms of, why it hasn't happened?
The British people at large are genuinely undecided. Some say yes, some say no. There are very few people who have no opinion.
Isn't that always the case? Right.
And so there's no undecided middle to persuade it. And there have been some. The biggest loser on Brexit so far has been the London real estate market. And if you were looking for an apartment in London, you would say, gosh, I wish it would go further, because rents particularly in what's called the city area, which is the old area that was originally inside the walls of the walled city of London.
Oh.
And they still call that the city. And it's the commercial heart. Parliament buildings are right on the edge of that precinct. And apartment rents are, I can't give you an actual number, but it's like $20,000 a month for a one-bedroom apartment.
Whoa. And you complain about Burlington.
Well,
Sounding good.
And there, at one time, there was kind of a fad. Middle Eastern oil people would come and they would pay $100 million
Right.
for a small building, and
Wow.
so that fad has tapered off, but nowhere near enough for a lot of people.
yeah.
So which we didn't cover, Brexit means British exit.
Right,
So,
exactly.
And they coined this phrase, and I'm not sure who started it, but it's stuck. Everybody calls it Brexit. Brexit.
Well, the British radio and television people are very fond of giving nicknames
Oh,
to.
okay, so they started
Yes.
this?
Yes.
The Brexit,
The Brexit.
yes.
So there's been several votes, and I mean more like maybe several dozen votes in some
Right.
around this issue, and trying to get an agreement in place with the EU, and whether there's going to be an agreement to leave or there's going to be a hard exit. That's particularly concerned for the Ireland, North-South Ireland
Right.
border.
And that was a very unfortunate collateral damage, because the north of Ireland, as many of our viewers may know, is subject to an incredibly murderous conflict, which has gone on for 50 years, and nearly 10,000 people have been either directly murdered by the goon squads, which operated on both sides, or by explosions and other incidents connected to that. And I don't know exactly why Muammar Gaddafi was sending $1 million a month to the IRA.
Really?
Yeah.
That's an interesting story.
Good grief, that'll make you think a while.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, I think he just enjoyed
Watching this.
shoving his thumb in the eye of
Wow.
the United Kingdom.
Yes,
Interesting.
that would make sense.
Yes.
So you have this long history of conflict across that border, and really what it comes down to is Northern Ireland is not part of the UK. Is that correct? Southern Ireland is part of the UK.
No, other way around.
Other way around. So Southern Ireland is part of.
It is an independent republic.
Is an independent republic. They're part of the EU, and one of the things they're trying to avoid is Northern Ireland, which is part of the UK. They're trying to avoid a hard border between the two.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And after those 40 years where there were armed checkpoints on both sides of the
Right.
border,
Right.
and people trying to cross the border would be kidnapped and never be seen again, and so no one really wants to go back to that.
What vote on Brexit would make the hard line? What one would make that happen?
They have to come to an agreement. They have to sign a deal with the EU, basically, to have some sort of border. And the EU is basically said no. We have to regulate trade going in and out if you're going to be an independent country because
Right.
we have, all this stuff.
Well,
So
because the UK is more interested in Canada and India. That's sort of their two major trading partners.
And the U.S.
And the U.S., of course, sorry.
and they want to be able to negotiate their own trade deals
Right.
and stuff.
Because I can't recite a list for you, but there are out of the Fortune 500, probably 50 or 75 companies which are of UK management. They have Unilever is the best
Right,
known
right.
example.
Unilever, BP,
Yeah,
there's several of them.
and so they have very strong trade relations with the U.S. already. And so many people in the UK are saying, well, it wouldn't be so bad to get shut out of the EU. All they do is ship us very high-priced Mercedes.
Well, Theresa May was working really hard to try to get an agreement, and after I don't know how many votes she had, she just about said, "I'm done." Right? I mean,
Well, she had a
this
vote of
isn't
no
good.
confidence,
Yeah,
which we
right.
kind of talked about
Right.
earlier. Is
That's it,
forces
they've
an
done it.
election.
Yeah.
She stepped down. Boris Johnson took over. He's now lost 3 votes in a row.
Yeah, and the Supreme Court voted against him.
And the Supreme Court voted against him. That was
Well,
an
he
interesting
tried a
situation.
maneuver which is called proroguing.
What is that?
I like how they have a term
Proroguing?
for it.
Yeah,
Well, it goes way back to King Henry IV, I think.
because he got the Queen Elizabeth involved in this
Mm-hmm.
decision too, which I don't think she was too excited about.
No.
Well, again, it's the situation that Queen Victoria complained so bitterly about, being forced to say something that she didn't want to say.
Right. 'Cause
And
didn't he ask her for permission to send the Parliament home and close
Yeah,
it
but
down to sort of
That's
stall
basically
this whole thing off?
yeah, and the U.S. president actually has a power very similar to proroguing. I don't know, in politics you never say never,
Right.
but I don't think it's ever been invoked by an American president.
Andrew
If-
Jackson.
If so, it would be before the Civil War.
Yeah.
Really?
But
What did he do, Jackson?
Andrew Jackson tried to send the
that's
Oh, the
right.
the house to put the house home.
Oh,
Yeah, he did.
The
House was not very happy about
that
it,
didn't work well,
but-
I bet.
And it says in the Constitution that the president
Has the power.
Has
Yeah.
the power.
Yep. The Congress promptly took that power away.
Yeah, I was gonna say, that Trump wouldn't try that.
Yes.
And so and the kings prior to the 17th century would fairly routinely use it. The Parliament would get off on something that the king didn't want to talk about, and so he'd prorogue it.
Right.
He would
Go
send them home.
Right, yeah. Because one thing I read that's really serious, I think, is that they may lose out what they have now as the European health insurance, and if they leave, I don't know what's going to take its place from a health insurance perspective without being incredibly expensive, or how they're going to recreate a new health system.
You know, I don't know details, but the UK had a working public health system.
Before this?
The official plan, but no one was compelled to belong to it.
Huh.
But you had to have a National Health Service card in order to get prescriptions and things
Right.
like that. But you could arrange to have your health care through a private provider. And the private system, it ranged about 1/3 of the total healthcare system. And so if the public health service physician was arrogant or rude or something, you always had the option of going down the
with the
road
card.
and paying for it.
Yeah,
Right.
interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and you know, England kind of had their, like you said, they had their own system in place before the EU, and I think they got a waiver from the EU to keep part of that system. So some of it is still
To keep
functioning.
the private part.
The
That's
private
right.
part, yeah. So the UK is the only, it's not the only, one of the only countries in the EU that has private health insurance.
But
still.
if they just leave without an agreement, doesn't that go away?
The public part goes away.
Yeah,
they'd
'cause
have to they'd have to reconstitute their own public health
Yeah.
insurance.
Which I don't think would be terribly difficult.
Oh, I know. I was just reading
No.
there, everybody was like, whoa, now what do we do? Because it could be very expensive, but.
Yeah.
So now that, we've gone through three prime ministers actually, if you count
Yep,
David
Cameron,
Cameron, countless votes, they don't have a deal. Boris Johnson is basically, they had this whole maneuver to try to, send the parliament home until basically the deadline that he had set.
Right.
He set a hard deadline for the end of
End
October.
of the month, right, the 30, tomorrow.
No,
Yeah.
well,
Oh, October, I'm sorry.
October
right.
31st, right?
Right, yep,
Yeah.
that's right.
And basically tried to send Parliament home until the week before that date. That failed. The court struck it down. Where do we go from here? Like, what happens now?
Well, he tried to get a vote of no confidence.
About himself?
Well, and have a new election,
Right.
because he felt that the previous election had been totally inconclusive.
Huh.
It resulted in a hung parliament with only 1 or 2 votes between the two sides.
Well, that's what they said. There's 3, they've split into 3 stay, leave with an agreement, and it's almost 1/3 each. And there's no side that's got more than the other 2 sides, and they can't come to an agreement.
You'd think the stay and leave with an agreement folks could come together
Yeah, right,
and figure
exactly,
something
do
out.
something.
but-
Yeah. And what the EU had set as a condition, as I understand it, is that the UK continue the customs union. And that's what has to do with Northern Ireland.
Right. So
because-
that goods and services
Yeah,
can flow back and forth.
right.
Yeah.
We have the same issue with the tunnel, right, that goes under the channel
Oh,
to
yes,
France.
right, that's right.
Yeah.
The channel.
The channel, exactly. And what that would look like, because now we have, it's not just ship traffic anymore that's going back and forth from the continent. It's their truck traffic, and that poses a challenge because they'd have to have a checkpoint in the
Right,
middle of the
in the middle
tunnel
of home.
or something,
Well, and I don't know how those things will work out. My wife and I went to, we did a cruise on the Rhine, and then
Oh, lovely.
and then a nostalgia trip for me back to Scotland
Yeah.
for a week and a half. So to get from the end of the Rhine cruise over to England, we took what in my student days had been like a converted LST ferry.
Oh, really? There you go.
And the current ferry, if you think of one of those gigantic Princess cruise ships,
Right?
That's exactly what it is. But the front of it opens up
Oh, for the cars.
for
and
a
so-
ramp,
Yeah, oh,
and they can park four lines of cars
wow.
on 3 different decks. And the top deck is a casino.
Oh, they thought of everything.
Yep. Well, they got to keep you entertained
Yeah,
while
right,
you're
exactly.
going
While
across
you're
the
on
channel.
Good grief.
Yeah.
Well, the has been together for 46 years, right? And what they're saying is you just can't snap your fingers and everything's great, because it's going to take a long time to sort out all these issues of trade and the economy and.
Well, most of the I shouldn't say arguing, but most of the debate right now is really in Britain. It's not really, there's not really any dialogue today between Britain and the EU. It's Parliament trying to
It's
figure
their
out
own-
what they're
yeah,
going to do with themselves.
They found
That's
the enemy,
right.
and it is they. Is that the
Yeah,
the
kind
problem?
of, yeah.
Well, and that was Boris Johnson's problem,
Right.
because his own party was not in agreement.
Oh,
Right.
what do they want? Because he wants out with an agreement.
Some want out, some
Yeah.
want in.
Oh.
And at first, the Labour Party thought that was good fun, but
But they have the same
Okay.
problem.
they have the same
If
problem.
end of October comes and goes and there's still no vote, is it an automatic out? I mean, there must be
It
some.
would appear so.
So there won't be any agreement, which if I was them, I'd want an agreement.
Well, so that's an interesting question, right? Because, you know, this is a deadline that was set by Boris Johnson, right, the Prime Minister, and, you know, can he enforce that without a vote from the Parliament? Like, can he enforce a hard deadline
Yeah.
that, you know, that Parliament hasn't voted on?
And I haven't seen what the reaction of the EU will be.
Right.
And of course, the EU has got all kinds of problems of its own.
Right,
They still haven't resolved the Greek debt crisis. They've kind of kicked the can down the road
Right.
by refinancing the Greek debt at lower interest
Right.
rate and a longer time frame. But Greece is in terrible shape, and I happen. My daughter-in-law is employed by the United Nations,
Oh, what
and
exciting.
and Greece was her portfolio, and and it was pretty tense because
Yeah.
she'd never been involved in this kind of international politics
I don't know,
before.
like many people have.
Right.
And so, like most people, she had a Facebook page, and so she arrived in Athens that particular night, went to the hotel. Next morning, she went out jogging, and her picture was on the entire front page of the Athens Post, the
Whoa.
main newspaper, and with the heading, "The Mean Bulgarian."
Oh, really? Good
no.
God.
Oh, no.
Go right back to hotel. Do not open the door.
Yeah, she felt very unsafe
I'm
jogging.
sure she did. I would feel that way too.
That's funny.
Ooh.
And all of the issues that she worked on, Greece eventually said, well, those are all good ideas, but we're going to try something else. And
That didn't work.
there's some, well, it hasn't not worked, but it's an unstable situation.
It is, yeah.
So with
And-
all this said and done about Brexit I mean, what's going to happen to the U.S. If whatever the vote is? We've got to have some kind of impact here on our stock markets, on cost of goods maybe.
Well, we're going to have to
I mean,
renegotiate trade
Yeah.
agreements.
I suspect that, markets tend to be a leading indicator.
Heard that before, is it?
Yeah, and I would have to guess that for most of the companies that would be directly involved, that's been factored into the stock price for a long
Really?
time.
Yeah.
So that won't be as dramatic as maybe.
They're basically planning for a hard exit at this point, which means that.
Which means no agreement, right?
Which means
You
no
just go-
agreement, and that doesn't necessarily impact the business community as much. It will for certain industries because
Right.
suddenly you're going to have tariffs on things that you didn't have tariffs on before. But your competing goods may also have tariffs because you're going to have the UK tariffs.
The sector that is most dramatically affected by Brexit is finance.
Right.
And London could lose 2,000 or 3,000 jobs
Whoa,
Yep.
because,
that's a lot of jobs.
and it is, and and they're very high-paying jobs.
Yeah.
They're the ones who are contributing to that London real estate market.
Right. Exactly.
Interesting.
So you're saying London real estate market prices may come down a little bit.
I fully expect it.
Yeah. What other, if you had a crystal ball, what do you think, will happen, if we came back and had this conversation a year from now? What do you think will have transpired over the last year?
Well, eventually, Parliament will get serious about talking the issue over. Presently, you're seeing political gamesmanship.
Right.
When I was about 15, we lived in New Jersey, and my father, on a Sunday afternoon, loved to watch the World Wrestling Championships.
Right, Dad.
And so on a particular day, the Nazi Stomper, or whatever the name of the bad guy, the wrestler who dresses in black, and he was against the Great White Hope, or whatever they called the wrestler who was
The good
dressed
guy.
in
Because you're always
white.
supposed to have a good
Yes,
guy and a bad guy.
Bad guy.
Yeah.
Right.
And so the Nazi Stomper had the Great White Hope in an illegal chokehold. And while he was doing that, he kept pointing to his crotch to get the referee to see what the Great White Hope was doing to him, which was nothing.
Right.
And of course, the crowd gets very involved in these things, and they began chanting, "Chokehold, chokehold."
Nice.
So eventually the referee went up and looked at the chokehold and stopped it.
So we see a parallel to this
So-
isn't good.
So my mother came in and she said, "Why are you guys wasting your time watching this junk?" And my father, always a little bit of a smartass, he said, "Oh no, this is an education in how politics works."
Oh, there you go.
Hold him in a chokehold until the referee comes
but
in.
People, what percentage? You said 50,
52%.
52% of United Kingdom people, voters, want this to
No,
happen.
They
So-
want 52% in 2016 wanted
Oh,
this
yeah,
to
that's
happen.
probably true. I wonder what would happen. I wonder what would happen if they put it out again for a vote.
Well, it's an interesting thought.
Yeah.
Well, and the areas of resistance to Brexit were north of Ireland, and they voted almost 4-1 in favor of remaining.
Remaining.
And Scotland voted
Oops.
about 2-1 to remain. But Northern Ireland and Scotland put together are about 8% of the total population.
Bruce, I've just, we ran out of time so quickly. This was really fascinating.
Well, that's fun.
Thank you very much. I'm so glad you tuned in. I hope you enjoyed it. We certainly were out of our realm
Yes,
here.
a little beyond Vermont.
A little beyond Vermont, but I just couldn't stand listening to it anymore without understanding it. So we'll wait and see what happens at the end of October. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next week. In the meantime, keep listening beyond the sound bites.